Hello and welcome to part 3 of this series on writing a paper with the Journal of Research Administration in mind. Cliff Studman here again to take you through the construction of a paper. The general aim here is that you should be able to decide where any paragraph or sentence fits within the overall structure of a paper and to write paragraphs accordingly. So let's get into the detail about the makeup of a paper. What follows is a general guide. In any particular paper, individual sections may differ in length or may be merged together depending upon the nature of the paper. However, the principle remains that most papers will contain material which would fit under these headings. Your peer advisor will help with getting things in the right place and with the overall structure of your particular paper, especially if you write under these headings. The standard structure of a paper is title, including author affiliations, abstract, keywords, introduction, methods, results, analysis, discussion, conclusions, referencing, acknowledgements. Now, all the necessary information needs to be somewhere, and the paper structure is designed so that the reader can find the information he or she wants. So, it must be where the reader expects to find it. If it's in the wrong place, the reader, e.g., the reviewer, may not see it. In this respect, it is no different from a typical research proposal. In principle, it doesn't matter which type of paper you are presenting, they will all have these components. However, all papers will vary in content and emphasis, and, as I mentioned, some sections may be smaller or larger and may be subsumed into other sections. This means that the next slides are a guide rather than being prescriptive. The main aim is to make your paper clear and concise, and the following framework will help to organize your thinking, even if the final result involves merging sections together in some other way. Your peer advisor will help you to arrange your early drafts into a more readable fashion if you try to distinguish the different components, at least initially. You should also end up with a more logical and well thought out piece of work. Your chosen journal may also have some guidelines as to how to structure the paper, and you should get familiar with the journal style and format by studying the guide for authors and also by looking over past issues. This is best done early on in your preparation to write your paper. So, starting from the beginning, the title has to be clear and state what the paper is about. Ideally, you should aim for a title that is no longer than 12 to 15 words. However, it should have enough information so that the reader can immediately understand whether he or she needs to read further. I'll mention the format for this while we are here. You will need to enter the author's details following the style the journal requires. JRA wants 14-point Times New Roman bold font for the title and 12-point Times New Roman bold for author and 12-point Times New Roman not bold for the author's organization. For the JRA, the title abstract is in bold normal, but the text is not bold and in italics. The title, keywords, is in normal italics, not bold. That, by the way, is the only title that isn't in bold. The actual keywords are in italics. Almost everything else in the journal will be Times New Roman 12-point normal. Of course, you don't have to remember all this. Just look it up in the guidelines for authors from the SRAI or journal websites. And the good news is that this is about as fussy as the JRA gets, at least until you get to tables and figures and of course references. These all have their own style and formatting. After dealing with the essentials, the paper begins with the abstract. Now, the abstract is a crucial part of your paper. It will be used for many purposes, including displaying on the JRA website and for passing to abstract databases. Therefore, it needs to be complete in itself. If you like, you can think of it as the trailer of your paper, just like the trailer for a movie. Interested people should want to follow up on what you have done. Therefore, it will be the most often read part of your paper. Incidentally, the conclusions are the second most read part, an important point to remember when you get to them. The abstract is therefore a concise summary of all the key issues in the study. Some journals place a word limit on the abstract. For JRA, there are no specific limits, but an abstract of around 350 words or less would be more than adequate. The abstract needs to include information about the background, objectives, and methods, but also reports on the results, conclusions, and recommendations. It should stand on its own, and therefore it should not refer to any other part of the report, such as a figure or table. And now a very important point. The abstract will usually be the last part of the paper that you actually write. So your abstract will need to capture the key points of your research from pretty well every section of the paper. And yes, you are revealing the ending of your story, but that is the key point of the sales pitch here. People will want to find out how you got the conclusions, which is why they will get hold of the full paper and read the full developing story. So here is a simple checklist to help you make sure you have all you need in your abstract. In fact, some people don't even do that. Most people read the abstract and the conclusions and then delve into the rest of the paper if they are interested. However, they will be looking for the detail in the right place, so that is where you have to put it and why you need to structure your paper correctly. Immediately following the abstract, 5 to 10 keywords should be listed. You can use your own or seek advice from the web or from specialists in the area. It is a good idea to use lists of suitable keywords from various websites. Have a look at what keywords your references used. It is important to remember the keywords are used by search engines, so they need to be both specific and broad. Generic terms like education or research management are as important as more specific words. And don't forget the formatting, of course. The introduction. The introduction of a paper is the who, what, why, when, and where section. It sets the scene for the research you are about to describe. To get to more specific details, the introduction explains what the paper is about and its context. It justifies why you decided to do the research. It will usually include some or all of the items we will describe in the next few slides. However, they would appear in the form of a continuous narrative rather than as subheadings. Outlining the background to the research locates the research in the broad subjects area and contextualizes the research in global, regional, national, and local contexts. You should usually cover who and where briefly. It is important to be clear about the scope of your study. You will need to outline the specific circumstances of your research, what is out as well as in. For example, your research applies to private research companies rather than universities. The aim should be to keep these details short but complete. Let's look at the why first. The why describes the problem. it can be explained through a problem statement. So, a problem statement explains why you are working on this subject and should provide information such as the following: problem identification, what's wrong, background, what is the context. Next one considers its significance. Why does it matter for research administrators? Seriousness, how big a problem is it? Consequences, what happens if the problem continues? Knowledge gaps, what is known and what is currently not known about the problem. Who, when, and where are just stating briefly the time of the research, where it was conducted, and who was involved in broad terms rather than individuals. No research project covers everything, and inevitably there are limitations. You may have a project that deals with issues in primarily undergraduate universities, for example. Who involves not just the researchers or the institution, but should also consider who will implement the results. Who will need to do what, and how will they know about it? Studies on the uptake of research findings tell us that it's a very good idea to engage with the potential users and implementers right from the start. They may be able to suggest things that will make your study stronger. Asking who implements the findings leads to the question of who should you be talking to about this right now? Now let's talk about the what of the study. This can be stated in various ways. First, using research objectives. The main aim objective is a statement of what the research project is seeking to achieve. E.g., we want to see if happiness amongst staff will reduce the time from notification of project funding to getting the research go-ahead. Ideally, they should be SMART objectives: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely, although this may not work so well for reflective inquiries or other types of study that do not follow the traditional scientific method approach. Specific objects are subsets of the main objective, e.g., to determine how to measure happiness in a research office, or to find out how happy research administrators are, or to determine if this makes a difference in the time from notification of project funding to getting the research go-ahead. Alternatively, you can formulate your what as a set of questions that are related to the specific objectives. Examples: are research administrators happier than other people? How do you measure happiness in a research office? Does it make a difference? What happens if... The research objectives guide many aspects of the study, including the literature review and the data collection instruments. A third approach is to use a hypothesis. This is a very specific theory you want to test out, e.g., people with blue eyes get more research grants than people with green eyes. Not every study has hypotheses. For example, it is unlikely that an exploratory study using a qualitative approach would have any. The same applies to reflective inquiries and other types of article. I find it very helpful to try to formulate my paper by trying to write my aims out using all three forms. It helps me to focus on just what I'm trying to tell people in my paper. However, I would only use at most one of the three methods in the actual paper, whichever made the most sense in the context of the paper itself. And sometimes I might not use any in the final version, depending on the paper. Sometimes you may need to define clearly the key concepts involved. In a very technical or methods-intensive area, this is particularly important. Now, acronyms. As a non-American, I often struggle with acronyms that are familiar to most Americans. Remember, journals are intended for a worldwide audience, and NIH may not mean much to a non-American. So, for example, We use the CIA, that is the Culinary Institute of America, or my favourite, UK, which of course stands only for the University of Kentucky, according to my very good friends from that part of the world. Make sure you give the full meaning of every abbreviation or acronym the first time you use it. Thereafter, the initials are just fine. You will need to have done a literature review, and this is the place to put it. In a paper, a literature review generally forms part of the introduction. However, there may be times when a literature review is a very large part of the paper. For example, if you are doing the review, and you may want to have it as a separate section. Sometimes people are not sure how to do a lit review. It involves collecting titles and abstracts, and then reading the key papers. Obviously, your library will help with this. Nowadays, it almost always involves an online search. Google can be useful, but proper search engines are better. Back issues of JRA are a good place to look. Note what keywords do writers use who are writing papers that are of interest to you for your study. Now here is a very good time-saving tip. If you're working online, get the full reference. It can be very irritating and often hard to find the last page number of an article when you didn't note it when you first saw the referenced article. Now, I'll give you a quick review of how to read a paper. When you get a hit in your search, the first thing you do is to read the title. If this looks good, read the abstract. Does this contain the information that is relevant to your research? If it still looks good, go to the conclusions. You may have to download the paper to do this. These should tell you more about what the research has found. After that, you might want to check the methods that were used or the introduction to check the context under which the research was done. When you have an article or paper you're using as a reference, I suggest you make brief notes for each paper. Usually just what stands out for you, as well as a note on the methodology. If using hard copy, then keep your note with the paper. This will save time later when you're trying to remember who it was who said something you read that turns out to be important and needs to be quoted. There may be both theoretical and experimental literature, and also reviews that consider research carried out by others. Ideally, you should analyse and synthesize data critically, and identify the gaps and misunderstandings in present scholarly knowledge or research. How many subjects? Were there too few for a trustworthy result? Were they selected properly to represent the population of interest? What were the limitations? Does the analysis make sense? Is the statistical analysis valid? Do the conclusions follow from the results? Ideally, the literature review should include a discussion of up-to-date literature, although older papers may also be relevant. Different opinions should be included. The aim is to make a balanced and objective argument based on the existing literature. You should summarise the key points relevant to your research, e.g., Jones 2009 reported on the study of 200 women in Maine. He noted that... It is also appropriate to include a critique of a piece of work, e.g., unfortunately, Jones did not state how the subjects were chosen, so there is some question about the validity of his results. Of course, you should be careful about your comments. Jones might be one of the reviewers. In a paper, the literature review has to be more focused and specific than, say, in a graduate thesis. Typically, You might be citing 20 or 30 references, but of course this varies a lot depending on your topic and the type of study you are conducting. A paper which is entirely a review of research may contain 100 or more references. In the end, your literature review should point towards your particular piece of research. It should justify why you want to do the research that you are going to report in your paper. There are several things the introduction does not contain. For example, you won't be reporting the results just yet, nor will you be discussing the outcomes, for example. You won't be discussing your methods either. You might want to express what you hope the research will achieve, but more in a general way, such as, this research is highly relevant to compliance managers and may lead to better performance. But even this sort of comment is usually more appropriate in the discussion section later. The methodology simply describes what you did and how you got your results. You should try to provide a rationale or justification for your choices. For example, the choice of quantitative or qualitative approach, case study, or experimental research. The same applies to your design, sampling, and data collection methods. The strengths and weaknesses of different types of approach reported in the introduction could be explained, leading to why you chose yours. If appropriate, you could make reference to research methodology literature. You will need to explain how the data was analysed. So this section is very much the practical how-to section, so that in theory, anyone could repeat your study by following the methods you describe. If you are changing processes, how did you decide on the intervention to make? If you had to make changes to the process after the initial start, on what basis did you adjust your intervention? What alterations did you make in the course of your research? Unless it is trivial, you won't necessarily say why you had to change in detail. That would be a result, other than to say it was necessary. You will explain this later in the results and discussion sections. For a study which involves surveys and statistical data, all the key parameters need to be included, such as population, survey size, response rate, choice of participants, and, briefly, how you dealt with privacy of information. Finally, you should cover any ethical issues. I'm sure you will be aware of the need for approvals from an internal review board for any research involving humans or animals, or which may impact the physical environment in any way. Okay, so what happened? As a result of what you did, what resulted? This is what your study found. As a result of changing a process, how did performance change? What was the consequence of each adjustment that you have described in the methods section? Results should be presented clearly and concisely. Normally, raw data would not be presented, but rather you will provide it in the form of a graph, a table, diagram, or in a narrative. The data should be presented only once in the most effective manner. Obviously, all figures must be clearly and unambiguously labelled using the journal's instructions. In the results, you should also discuss any problems you encountered, or where you may have rejected some data, for example, and explaining why. You may have to explain the immediate outcome of a change and then what happened if you made further changes. You would have described in the methods section that an intervention didn't work and so you had to alter it, but you wouldn't have said exactly what happened at that point in your paper. Don't start interpreting the results here. That comes later in the next sections. You may find that the best way to present your results will be in the form of a graph, figure, or table. The JRA's guidelines for authors has very specific instructions on how to present these. You should indicate where they need to go in the finished paper, but you need to place them at the end when you send your paper in for review. Only black and white graphics are allowed, and the format of the titles and place markers is very specific. See the guidelines for details. Once presented, you should attempt to analyse the data and explain what it is saying. Often, this is in the same section as the results. However, it helps your thinking to try to separate the two, and at least to start with, try to separate out results and analysis. Analysing is about interpreting the results in ways that anyone could do, rather than your personal take on the results. For example, the study found that 85% of research administrators love their job, compared to only 45% of academics. By the way, this is all imaginary data, of course. Sometimes, for example, if you have a lot of data to report, you could analyse each set of data as you present them. This is something your peer advisor will help you with. Quite often, a decision about this only occurs after 2 or 3 drafts of the paper. Of course, any statistical analysis would be presented here. Your discussion is where you can express views and opinions that follow from the research findings. You might want to make some further hypotheses. For example, you may say, the study showed that a happy research office turns things around faster. This suggests that managers should provide fun team activities for the staff, or other things which would make staff happier in their work. As indicated in the introduction, Jackson et al. 2015 demonstrated a number of ideas that would lead to happier offices in general. Data should be interpreted in the discussion. This interpretation includes the significance of the results and comparing them to previous study results. The discussion is where you have the chance to say what you think the results mean. You can also discuss its limitations and what further research needs to be done. Let's be honest, no research involving the social sciences is perfect, so don't be afraid to say what the limitations are. Better you than the referees. Some more things. You could suggest probable outcomes. As a result of the research, what changes could be made to government policy or to business priorities, for example. Then there are impacts. How will people's lives be changed? Research administrators, researchers, society at large, and so on. I think it is also a good idea to propose ways in which the research findings could be used. This is research uptake. How could people use the results? Hopefully you have planned this from the start and involved people who could use the research, e.g. your Vice-Chancellor or the Board of Directors, and you've addressed the issues that concern them. They will then be much more interested in your paper. People have trouble with understanding the difference between analysis and discussion. A simple way of distinguishing the two is that, again in theory, anybody could provide the same analysis given your data, while no two people would write the same discussion. Analysis is what comes straight out of your data, no need to guess. Discussion is where you consider possibilities, why things went right or wrong, and what could be done about it, and how your results might be used. Conclusions summarize the new knowledge that has arisen from this study. Obviously, conclusions are based on the results of the study and do not necessarily represent the personal views of the author. However, you could preface a comment with, "It is suggested that... The conclusions are just that. It brings together the main points that have been found as a result of the study and which have already been explained in detail elsewhere in the paper. Therefore, more results or additional new analysis or discussion should most definitely not come in this section. Note that the conclusions will still contain more information than the abstract. Readers should see it as an expanded statement of what you found and outlined in the abstract. Sometimes a research study may suggest significant new things to study or may recommend changes to the way things are done. They should be logical, practical, and creative suggestions for practice and for subsequent research. Remember, the conclusions are the most read section of your paper after the abstract, so make sure they cover your findings completely, concisely, and accurately. All references referred to in the text are listed in the reference list. They are arranged alphabetically, strictly following the journal's format as specified in the instructions to authors. Properly used reference programs such as the word referencing system will generally, though not entirely, produce an error-free bibliography. On the other hand, any reference in the list should also appear in the text of the paper. This is a two-way requirement and needs a one-to-one correlation. After a few edits, you will not believe how difficult it is to get the two to agree. You really do have to check every reference both ways. This occurs, for example, if you cite a paper several times, but then remove some of the citations in the editing stage. The reference may or may not get deleted in the list of references. You must of course follow the journal style, which for JRA is the American Philosophical Association or APA format. The guidelines for authors gives you details of this and examples, or you can check it out on Google. A third and quick option is to check the formatting in earlier issues of the journal, as I've mentioned earlier. Remember to thank any organisations that have enabled you to do the research, including your employer. You should also mention any people and colleagues who have assisted you in some substantial way, such as providing data, etc. Finally, you could, and probably should, even mention your JRA Author Fellowship Programme peer advisor. The JRA requires some additional material from you placed at the end of the paper. Again, see the guidelines for authors for details. This is the end of section 3. The final section will go over the submission and publication process with some useful tips for you. And as before, we would really appreciate your comments and suggestions for improvements to this webinar.